composition. It's tricky business, isn't it? Composition is just tricky. Why does it sometimes work and why sometimes it doesn't work at all? I know a lot of people struggle with this, and I did too, for quite a long time. But over the years, I have actually learned a lot, many things that help me with composition and building up my paintings. So that is the reason for me doing this little video. I just wanted to share some tips and tricks that work for me and that help me out a lot. I'm doing a little piece here, and I'm just going to show you the highlights while I give you my 5 tips. And after that, I'm going to use this piece as an example and another piece also as examples to just sort of explain my tips and tricks. I'm going to try and keep this brief and to the point so it doesn't end up really, really boring. So we're going to start with tip number 1, which is actually maybe a little boring, but I think it's actually true. Tip number 1 is there is no right or wrong when it comes to composition. That might sound stupid, but it's actually true. The reason for that is because we all like different things. We all see things differently. You and me can look at the same piece. I think it's really good. You think it's really bad. That's just the way it is. So, you know, if you're working on composition, just know that there is no right or wrong. You need to figure out what you like, what works for you. If it works for you, then it's right. So that's it, tip number 1. Tip number 2 is composition isn't just where on the paper you put your ink. Composition is about movement and direction and flow. You need this to make your piece interesting. You need all the different things on your paper to work together. That is so important. You need that flow and direction to trigger your eye, to make it interesting. Again, I'm going to explain this a little bit more briefly just on this picture. You can already see sort of the individual spots of ink, if you will, that I've put down on the paper are sort of already working in very, very different directions. But at the end, they're going to be working together. And so very important, movement, direction, flow. Tip number 3 is a little bit about symmetry. It's about lines. It's about envisioning lines, dividing your piece into smaller pieces in order to help you figure out where to put your ink and what to do with it. This piece, right now, you can actually see a line sort of in this direction. It's actually going to end up more like an arch, like this. This is what I am envisioning for this piece. I don't want this arch to be too pretty and too perfect, because pretty and perfect gets boring sometimes. So I'm trying to sort of, change it up a bit. It's going to be an arch, but I'm now having sort of a line in that direction. It's one of the most important things, and one of the things that have helped me the most. And when this piece is done, I'm going to do some more drawing to sort of explain why this is so important. Tip number 4, sometimes you have a plan, it doesn't go as planned because ink have a life of its own. We all know this, it's annoying, it doesn't have to be. But when it comes to working on a piece, composition and everything, don't be afraid to improvise. Just because it doesn't go as planned doesn't mean you can't make it work. So that's tip number 4, improvise. It's something that we need to do all the time, especially with ink, because they don't always cooperate. Not necessarily a bad thing. Tip number 5 is about experimenting. Like I said in tip number 1, there's no right or wrong. And that is why you need to experiment. If you're trying to sort of work on composition and figure out what works and what doesn't, experiment, because that's how we learn. experiment. Even if it doesn't turn out to be your best piece ever, you will still learn something. Why didn't this work? Why didn't my composition work on this piece? So never ever be afraid to experiment. We tend to get stuck doing the same things over and over again. So experiment, learn, grow. Oh, that sounded really philosophical. I like it. Anyway, those are my 5 tips. I am almost done with this piece. So I am going to show you this finished one and another one and do a little drawing because I want to just explain a little bit more about the lines and the symmetry, because that is something that I think can help you out a lot. It did for me anyway. This is the finished piece and I'm quite happy with this one, loving the color choice. I wanted to talk a little bit more, give you a few examples and talk about those lines and balance and symmetry when you're figuring out your composition and you're building up your painting. With this one, I have sort of an arch. This could end up really interesting. It could also very easily end up boring. I'm gonna give you my opinion on how you make it look interesting. First of all the little individual spots of ink have many different directions. Already there, that's catching your eye. On this side of my arch, the ink takes up more space than it does on this side. Again, complete symmetry can sometimes be a little boring. Just changing it up a little by adding a little more ink here and a little less here catches your eye. In order to get some sort of a balance in your piece, if you're struggling a little with that, is to try and create the same amount of space around your edges. You can see, you can make almost sort of a little box in here, and you can see it's sort of, there's a good balance in this because you have almost the same amount of space out to the edge of your paper. What you also need in your piece is a focal point. And in this piece, my focal point is right around here. And you can start creating focal point and direction by using these lines. Now you can make a line straight down here. And you could make another one straight down here. And then this is my focal point. My ink is not directly in the middle. It's a little over to this side. You could also see a line right here, and you can actually see a line right here. Combining it with this one, you got a focal point and you got some sort of flow. Now, I could also have put a lot of ink down in this corner, filled out this entire spot. I would have negative space up here and over here, but nothing down here. You can still have balance. You could sort of also see a line, if I filled this out, a line in this direction. You would then have one in this direction and in this direction, which then creates sort of a flow. So filling up this entire corner could also have worked. So another example, we're going to talk a little bit more about symmetry. With this piece, it is basically all in this direction. That could get boring, but with this particular piece, I felt like it sort of fit the theme with the 2 rings that are connected and the ink going out in different directions. But because it's very symmetrical, it can easily get boring. And when I had done this you can see this, it's the last video on my channel, I felt like it needed something. So I wanted to add these little drops of ink. Now, I could have placed the drops in this direction. I think that would have been boring. I could have placed them in this direction, again, a little bit boring. This needed something to sort of throw it off a little, throw off the symmetrical in the piece. So instead, I chose this direction. It is those tiny little sort of crooked things that will sometimes bring a piece to life and make it more interesting. I got another one here. Now this is sort of I got a mat on this one. This is sort of a composition that we a lot of us use often, you go from one corner to the other. Again, this could very easily become boring. If you had sort of your ink in exactly this direction and using up the exact amount of space all the way through, it gets a little boring. You can very easily make this something that catches your eye by, first of all, having your ink sort of move in different directions. And then also, right here, ink goes out a little here. Then it goes out a little here and goes back over here. Instead of having that complete straight line, just throw in some shapes and some curves. And all of a sudden, instead of being boring, it becomes interesting, and there's so much more to it than just diagonal composition. So, I hope this helps if you're struggling a little bit with composition, because it's so easy to end up with boring stuff, but using those lines to figure out how to connect your ink on the piece and to create that balance, trying not to make things too symmetrical like this. Throw in some curveballs. That can really make a piece pop. So composition is it's tricky sometimes, and I think we all struggle with it, but I hope some of these little tips will help you a little. And again, experiment. Try something new, and then maybe use some of these tips to sort of guide you into building up your pieces just the way that you want them to be interesting and fascinating. So that's it for this little video. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope I will see you again real soon.